you don't want to be so open-minded that your brain falls out. What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to another episode of Curiosity Class. This week is a book report week. I've gotten a lot of positive feedback on previous book report episodes that I've done, so wanted to take the opportunity to do another one for this week. So this week is going to be lessons from the book As a Jew, written by Sarah Hurwitz. Sarah's amazing. She's authored, for those of you who don't know her, her background's pretty unbelievable. She was a speechwriter for the Obamas, specifically First Lady Michelle Obama. She wrote an amazing book, Here All Along, which was the first book I think that she had published under her own name. And it was an amazing book. I read that as well. And maybe we'll do an episode on Here All Along, but it was basically like an introduction to Judaism. And she came out with this book, As a Jew, reclaiming our story from those who blame, shame, and try to erase us. Earlier this year, I believe in 2026 or maybe the end of 2025. I think it was 2025 actually. So it's a really incredible book. It's very. She's an amazing writer in general, and I wanted to read a few excerpts from it, as well as just give some spitball and freewheeling thoughts and reactions that I had to it, as well as go over some main takeaways and lessons. So without further ado, let's dive in. So she does a really amazing job holistically of writing in a way that's very accessible. She has a background that's similar to, I think, a lot of Jews in America, similar to my experience growing up of being aware but far from religious, like going to Hebrew school and not really liking it, going to holidays and not really understanding, not knowing anything about the texts or what they mean or who the main players are and were. And so she does a really, really great job of diving deep in an accessible way to say, like, hey, this is what this is. This is what this is. This is what the Torah is. This is what the Talmud is. These are, the rabbis that I'm talking about when I say this. And she gives a really nice arc of Jewish history in a way that I hadn't experienced, before reading this book. Another huge difference in As a Jew as compared to Here All Along is she just dives deep and is nuanced but unapologetic in her arguments about specifically Zionism and anti-Zionism. So, writing a book after October 7th, I think, is probably a challenge and a totally different paradigm than pre-October 7th. But she just gives amazing arguments and excerpts about the benefits of Zionism and being unapologetically pro-Israel while being nuanced in a conversation about a complicated country, right? And so, yeah, she just does an amazing job of that. So I wanted to read a couple excerpts, one on kind of I think it'll explain some of the nuance very, very well. So this is basically talking about people on the pro-Israel side, and explaining their thought process. So I'm just going to read a little bit here. As Haviv Retegor notes, the grand strategy of the Palestinian national movement since the days of Yasser Arafat, a strategy upheld today mainly by Hamas, is a classically anti-colonial one. The idea is that just like the Algerians drove out their French colonizers in the mid-20th century with relentless guerrilla warfare, Palestinians can use relentless violence to drive out Jews. The problem is that Israeli Jews have no other home to which they can return, so they're not going anywhere. And with each war Palestinian leaders and their Arab allies have waged, with each suicide bombing and terrorist attack they have launched, hijacking airplanes, massacring Israelis in cafes, buses, schools, synagogues, at a Passover Seder, at the Olympics, with each statement from leaders declaring their intention to annihilate Jews, with each generation of Palestinian children taught with school textbooks and children's TV shows that glorify violence against Jews, Israelis have become further convinced that Palestinians are more interested in preventing Israel from having a state than having a state of their own. So that's obviously a very, I like what she's saying in that, like, she doesn't, the blame can't all be on Israel, right? Like that's crazy. And we can't say that, like, wait, there is agency and fault on the other side, right? And so when you say, like, oh, it's all Israel's fault, like, I think this is a really good argument of, like, why that's not the case. But this is an example of her nuance in that she then goes on to say, I'm going to read, here I'm reading again. I find it no less infuriating when defenders of Israel lay all the blame on Palestinians and the broader world. Israel bears plenty of responsibility for the current conflict, particularly with the rise of the right-wing national religious settler movement in the wake of the 1967 war. Members of this movement believe that settling the West Bank, which is considered part of the biblical promised land, is a crucial step in God's plan to bring about the Messianic era. They view Israel's victory in the 1967 war and subsequent military occupation of the West Bank and Gaza as the realization of biblical prophecies about Jews returning from exile and being restored to that land. So that's giving a little bit more clarity. And, to me, I read that as, hey guys, there's also there is blame to be had on the Israeli side, and it's not clear cut, right? And so I think the lesson that I take away from this section of her book is that the nuance here is extremely important. And you can't just say I have no problem saying I'm an unapologetic Zionist. I'm very pro-Israel, right? And unapologetically so. And that's not to say I don't disagree very strongly with actions that the country takes, right? Like I'm a unapologetic American. I disagree very strongly with a lot of stances that the American government takes. Like those, I think that those are, you can hold those truths in other areas at the same time, but as it comes to Israel and Palestinians, it's like it's like this third rail a little bit, where it's like you can't say both of those things at the same time. And so the lesson that I took away from her book is that I think her nuance is really refreshing, and it's nuance with unapologeticness, right? And I think that's the key, because what's the phrase? You don't want to be so open-minded that your brain falls out, right? So she's not making claims, she's very clear, I'm an unapologetic Jew, I'm an unapologetic, pro-Israel Zionist, right? Period, full stop. Then also saying but there's also these issues that are real that I want to talk about, and not naming them has problems in and of itself. And one of my favorite podcasts, For Heaven's Sake, the two hosts, Yossi Klein Halevi and Danielle Hartman, they talk about the committed versus the non-committed, or the troubled committed, as Danielle puts it. And the gist of it is basically that he's willing to have any conversation with someone who is committed. And by committed, he means you support the state of Israel. You agree that it is a place that exists, that should exist, that there's no question in your mind about the fact that it exists and should exist. You're committed. You're also troubled because there's a lot to be troubled by. But the troubled committed versus the troubled uncommitted, he's not willing to have a conversation with the troubled uncommitted, only with the troubled committed. And I to me, that just feels so Jewish. Of course you have to wrestle with ideas, and of course you have to have these nuanced views and multiple things to be true at once, and be unapologetic in your stances. So I think those are both beautiful concepts, and the lesson of nuance is one that Sarah writes about very beautifully. So that was my first main takeaway from reading her book. Another lesson I got from this book that I thought was really beautiful is this idea of Jewish study. And in Judaism, the way that you study is a little bit unique. You're supposed to study with a partner, and in Hebrew it's called a Havruta, which I think the translation is friendship or partnership. And the idea, I'm actually just going to read you an excerpt from her book that talks about Havruta. When I first started doing Jewish study, I was struck by how different the process was from the way I often engage with content these days, by scrolling through social media on my phone. Instead of being done alone, anonymously, in front of a screen, Jewish study is traditionally done face-to-face, often in a pair known as a Havruta, which means friendship or partnership. There's no audience cheering or jeering from the comments section, just two people grappling with the same sacred text. The goal is not to win a debate or take down the other person. It's for each partner to push and question the other, sharpening each other's thinking, like iron sharpens iron, and learning from each other's opinions. It's to engage in what the rabbis called argument for the sake of heaven, to unearth the text's deepest meaning or meanings. An argument for the sake of heaven is one of, I think, my favorite concepts, maybe ever. I think that's so cool. And I love that there's this ancient wisdom drawn from it, in that it's important to have arguments to clarify your own thinking. And it's important to study with someone or people who sharpen your way of thinking. And so if you're surrounded only by people who think the same way as you do, you generate sloppy thinking. And so I think it's amazing if I say something to someone and they say like, well, actually, what about this? I love that, because I have the opportunity to enhance my thinking. And so, I couldn't have put words to that until I read this part, but knowing that, it gives me so much more comfort and meaning in knowing that, like, there is this almost like divine wisdom in argument for the sake of heaven, as long as you're coming to it in good faith, right? Like, I think arguing for the sake of arguing is very bad. And I personally, I struggle with that. Sometimes I argue just for the sake of argument. And I have to really ask myself, like, is this an argument for, with good faith for the sake of heaven? And so, yeah, it's one of my favorite concepts of Judaism, and the fact that you get to study, and you're supposed to study with someone who can sharpen your thinking, is something that I love in all aspects of life, in business, in work, in career, in relationship, in friendship. Having people that can challenge your way of thinking, I think is a concept that's coming around and really well understood and believed in 2026. Like, I don't think anybody hears that and says, nah, like, I want to be in an echo chamber. But it's really cool that this has existed in the ancient texts for as long as they have, and that this concept has existed for as long as it has. So those are a couple takeaways from the book. I'll link the book to in the description in the show notes. You can get a copy for yourself. I'd highly recommend reading it, as well as Sarah's first book, Here All Along. She's an amazing author. She does amazing work. And this was a book report, Lessons Learned from As a Jew by Sarah Hurwitz. Thanks so much, everybody. Bye.